Hey, it's Justin. This is Cinecope. Today we're going to be reviewing Soylent Green. It's a 1973, 1 hour, 37-minute vehicle for Charlton Heston. It's also Edward G. Robinson and Leigh Taylor Young. And I don't want to spoil the ending for you. Oh, wait.
To me, Hatcher, you gotta tell him Soylent Green is people!
Yeah, it's that movie. So us older people, 35 plus, we've all heard that line. It's thrown into various places. You know, it's mimicked, it's parodied, it's satired, it's in a few other places that you'll come across. But these days, really, not so much. So that's why I wanted to bring this one up. It's kind of falling off the radar, not for any other reason other than it's just, you know, it's a 1973 sci-fi movie. You're just not going to catch it unless you're looking for it, really. And I wanted to bring it up because in the movie, it is set in 2022. As of the time of this review, it's 2021, late 2021. We've been going through a lot of weird, crazy stuff, so it seems appropriate to focus in on this one. So what's going on here? The plot of Soylent Green is really not really much to do with Soylent Green. The vast majority of the movie is Charlton Heston playing Detective Thorne in his book, Soul, playing 21st century cop. So Charlton Heston as Detective Thorne, he's got a variety of especially murder cases that he's working on at the moment when the film starts. But very quickly, one comes up out of the blue and is a major case. It's a big one. It's obviously important to everybody and to him, because it involves one of the directors of the Soylent Corporation. And in this future, the Soylent Corporation, it's referenced, is responsible for 50% of worldwide food production. So they're a really big deal. The murder to him appears to be an assassination and not really a murder, something that he mentions really quick, so that's not a spoiler of any kind. And he starts investigating it. And along with his book, played by Edward G. Robinson as Soul, they start digging into every piece of evidence that they can find and generally slowly put together this whole thing of who was actually responsible for the murder of this director of Soylent. And in the course of investigating this murder, that's when they come across all of this really bizarre information about Soylent Green. So right off the bat, of course, the intro to this movie, kind of a short history of modern humanity, very, very short. Goes into, of course, you know, as far as they can go, which is about the 60s and 70s, and kind of it's an ecological disaster that's going on. You know, it's humanity's gone out of control with pollution, and it's having a very dangerous effect on the environment. They mention the greenhouse effect many times. Of course, that we use the old school way to refer to climate change. And then I remember in between those two, there was it was called global warming for a while there. But this was the big concern back then, was this greenhouse effect, this runaway greenhouse effect. I mean, it's still a concern today, but this was the focus back then. A runaway greenhouse effect that would render the entire planet inhabitable, really, in a lot of ways, to plant life, to animal life, to human life. So this is the overarching theme, the background, the sci-fi portion of this movie. So what's not clear and what's not explained, at least that I saw, is that these problems have got all kinds of knock-on effects to other pieces of society along the way. Everything from massive unemployment to a severe retardation of women's rights, a severe drop in living standards, all of which is in addition to the environmental problems that they're facing. So one of the joys of this movie, it being sci-fi, is that we get to see our characters interacting and living in this world for a good long portion of the film. I mean, it's to the point that this film is, it's like 75% enjoying this vision put together by Richard Fleischer and Stanley Greenberg, based on the novel Make Room by Harry Harrison, and they just let it soak. I mean, you get to see Detective Thorne, our main character, getting around the city, enjoying things. The number of extras in this movie is, I don't even know, it's incredible. They're everywhere. And you can almost smell this movie because it's implied. I mean, everyone's sweating. It's hot, it's humid. It's in the 90s, it's in the 100 degrees in New York City, of all places, and it just feels and looks disgusting. It just kind of starts creeping into your nose almost, because everyone you can tell is just gross. It's the kind of stink that is soaked into things all over the place. Even the walls, the wood, the concrete, the metal, everything. And you can really see just how pathetic their lives have really become. So of course Charlton Heston's character, Detective Thorne, he doesn't really know any better because he's middle-aged in this whole period of time, and 2022, it's about 30 years after everything is completely collapsed. So we get a lot of play-by-play by his book, Soul, on how things used to be. And he delivers some really great scenes where he's brought to tears almost with, or in some cases, yeah, he's just straight up brought to tears on some of these things that they're able to enjoy, these little tiny luxuries. So Detective Thorne and Soul are roommates in this little tiny apartment. Their situation definitely sucks, and it's alluded that, for example, the very little power or all power is completely self-generated, or maybe generated at the building level, because every apartment that Thorne goes into, and he goes into 3, I suppose, has got battery packs, large collections of like car batteries, and in his apartment they take turns riding this bike in order to top up the power, I suppose, to keep their lights on and to run their little tiny TV. Even in the little bit nicer apartment of the bodyguard, there's still racks of battery packs. So Thorne makes a lot of comments about people living in various situations, better or worse, and he mentions a lot of the things that you're going to see on the screen, but there's also a lot of the things that he does not mention, like for example the battery pack. But they make a big show of, for example, the kinds of food people have access to, and in some cases it's giving him clues as the detective as to who's involved and who's not. So back to these various social changes that seem to have happened. Women have been almost completely regulated to being furniture, it seems, is what they're constantly referred to as. They're employed by the building as basically live-in prostitutes, helpers, I don't know, basically furniture is really the best way to put it. I'm glad they used that term. So the connection to me between this ecological collapse and women losing all their rights all the way down to being basically slaves, that's not entirely clear to me. I think maybe that's a separate social commentary that's going on here, to the point where it's a bit disturbing, to be honest. I mean, it's questionable whether Leigh Taylor-Young's character is being essentially raped repeatedly, or if she's an actual willing participant in this, or if she even acknowledges that there is a difference. Bodyguard's furniture implies that she would have sex with Detective Thorne, as in that she was willing to, and Thorne immediately replies, you know, that if he wanted it, he would have taken it. So it implies that these women are furniture in the sense that they're not even really owned or controlled by the people that are renting the apartment, that the people that are renting the apartment really don't have any control over them like a slave, no property rights in that regard, that they're just owned by the building, that they're a part of the apartment. It's an interesting concept. I haven't seen it anywhere else. Another commentary going on here is massive unemployment, suggested at one point that New York has got 40 million people in it. There's really nowhere else to go. It's just a collection of other large cities and then vast open deserted spaces between them, and that within New York alone 20 million, so fully half of the population, is unemployed. Which I don't know what they're trying to get to. It's like, is it 20 million unemployed of the 40 million? So half the people are actually working? Or is it 20 million are unemployed of the class of people that would be expected to work, like the labor force participation rate? Because compared to, for example, today in the United States, it's only about 65% of people that are alive are actually working. So 65 versus 50%, that doesn't really sound like that big of a deal. So I think they meant something else, or maybe they're just not quite getting there with it. Because there's going to be elderly people that are retired. There's going to be children that are not of age. There's going to be people out of the workforce for other reasons, like taking care of children, people that are disabled, people that are too sick. So there's a large and natural number of people that are not working at any given time, and it doesn't affect what they would call the unemployment rate. But anyway, the whole point is even in an ecological disaster, I don't really see any reason for people not to be working. There's really not much discussion about the political dynamic that's going on here. Like the governor, Santini, he's got campaign posters out and for him to be voted for, but it's unknown whether or not there's any serious competition for him, or if there's other positions available. This movie really takes place really within the context of New York. The broader United States, it may not even exist, but it's never mentioned. So why is everyone putting up with all of these people just laying around asleep all day waiting for their food rations? So how do you feed all of these people? That is something that they do go into, and it's this Soylent corporation that's making all these various nasty food products as sort of a bread kind of thing, you know, your daily bread. And those come in the form of Soylent Red and Soylent Yellow at the moment, and then Soylent Green is kind of a new thing within the context of the movie. These Soylent kind of biscuits looking things, the movie simultaneously shows them being handed out in like a ration form and then also being sold. And we've got an interesting contrast between several different characters of different social strata in this, like the people waiting in line for Soylent. They're getting, you know, half-kilo rations or kilo ration, and that's like supposed to be per week. And then the next level up, even our working man, Detective Thorne, even he's got very little. Between him and Soul, his book, you know, they're really unable to completely feed themselves. Versus his lieutenant always has a big pile of Soylent on his desk. He's never eating any real food, but he seems to have plenty of Soylent. Then our next tier up is the rich, the really rich, who in addition to having things like air conditioning and games and toys, pretty luxuriously laid out apartments, they've also got some pretty nice food. Or rather food that we would consider normal, you know, in the context of a functioning society. But even they are struggling to get a hold of things like beef. So more into the setting here, the Soylent Corporation is kind of playing the gigantic corporate bad guy in the movie. No other corporations are really mentioned. In fact, it seems like Soylent is one of the very few corporations that's actually functioning on a day-to-day basis. There's many references to things, mechanical items especially, that are broken or disabled or failing, and that staff on site have to fabricate replacement parts and try to jury-rig them all the time to keep them working. Numerous references to publishing and books and newspapers being just something that just doesn't happen anymore, maybe due to cost. It's not like a Fahrenheit 451 situation where they're going around and eliminating these things and suppressing them. No, it's just that they just don't have them. Someone still is manufacturing clothes though, because look at some of these costumes. Yikes. Like this guy, Charles, the apartment manager, and that's his name, it's just Charles, which is completely legal by the way. He's got a get-up that's comparable to the original series Star Trek uniforms. Then the other pieces of this, you know, just might just be a limitation of what they're able to do in a short amount of time with a limited budget, but everything that is used by the state seems to be in perfectly good working order, or at least a lot better than the rest of society. For example, the riot control trucks, they all seem to work. Waste disposal trucks, they all seem to be in good order. The waste disposal plant seems to be in good order. The Soylent factories seem to be in good order. But curiously, even the richest people's apartment buildings are having things fail all the time. So obviously there's different levels of investment and priority going on within this society. Maybe intentional, maybe unintentional. So at the very end of the movie, Detective Thorne, Charlton Heston, when he's going on about Soylent Green as people, he makes a prediction. You know, he says, at the very end, he says that they're going to start rounding us all up and treating us like cattle and using us for food for their benefit. And in that context, a lot of this kind of setup makes sense. All of the necessary pieces for food production and population control, those things are all there. I don't know if I would call them an elite force, but they're definitely better dressed and better equipped than the actual police force. These guys in black with their masks, the waste disposal guys, they seem a little sinister. Maybe if the movie had a little longer runtime, we might see a bigger role for them. But it's obviously that Soylent is running the show. They're the ones putting pressure on the police. They're the ones putting pressure on the governor. They're the ones that are handing out favors and food and other things to people to get them to providing them with incentives. So one criticism I would have, and if I was going back to redo it, they make reference a couple of different times to that the knowledge that Soylent Green is made out of people is mentally crushing people to the point that they're committing suicide and kind of losing it. And this isn't just Soul, who does a really dramatic suicide thing with this whole euthanasia thing, but it's also the priest is visibly shaken up. I mean, not just visibly shaken up, I mean the guy is off the moon. And of course the Soylent director himself, when he gets killed, he kind of accepts it because he thinks that he's a bad guy and he knows this awful truth of what's going on, and it just kind of deflates him to the point where he's not even able to defend himself against somebody trying to kill him. Obviously puts Charlton Heston's character into a massive panic.
Soylent Green is people!
But at the same time, you know, there's got to be other people within this world that understand that this is what's going on. Obviously the people that have started it and are keeping it going know. And if Charlton Heston's character is able to figure this out, put the pieces together just by simply visiting the waste disposal plant, and verifying it for himself, then obviously a tremendous other number of people know what's going on. So I would have created more scenes where there's a bigger distinction between the people that really know what's going on versus the people that are just on the ground doing it, creating some distance between those two, because it's implausible. There's not an adequate amount of suppression within the society for the government to prevent people from talking about it, or go around and kill everybody about that knows about it or that talked about it, and then also keep in line everybody who knows about it. I mean, something like this would be a rumor, it would spread, and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it except kill everybody, you know? Because they try to take out Detective Thorne's character a couple of different times because he knows and he's trying to investigate in it, and they're willing to put time and resources into him, but they don't really do that great of a job with it. I mean, they're trying to assassinate him in public. I guess they're trying to make it look like just some regular old Joe is doing it, plausible deniability and all that. Then we get into some counterintuitive things about the whole process here. For example, the director is killed by the guy breaking in. He doesn't even have a gun, he's just got the meat hook. He manages to slip by whatever security measures and guards that they do have on station inside of that really nice apartment complex that he's in. But as we see a couple of different times when he goes into other buildings, even the poorest buildings, to go visit the bodyguard, for example, and his own apartment building, there's guards on the stairs with M16s. If there's guards on the stairs with M16s in even poor buildings, shouldn't there be maybe, say, at least 2 guards with M16s inside the really rich buildings? I get that they're relying on these security systems and whatnot, but they seem pretty poor, especially when they're obviously not working. You can't get a couple of guys to be guards. Maybe they were in on it, but there was no scene showing that. It was just the guy sneaking around. Another gripe I've got about it, Charlton Heston's just slavish devotion to his job. He seems really concerned about keeping his job, probably because there's so many unemployed people. They reference that there's other people out there just waiting to pick up their job from them. And this is a major motivation for him not to close the case when his lieutenant suggests that he should, that they're just going to write it off and close it up and that's going to go away. But his lieutenant is either getting pressure from, I mean, he mentions that he's getting pressure from the governor's office. He's probably getting pressure from the Soylent Corporation, but Detective Thorne character says, I can't close this because of what if somebody higher and hotter than you know, somebody higher rank than you starts looking into it, determines that I was the one who closed it up without a proper investigation. Which would make sense in another world, but in this world, why wouldn't they just tell him that his job depends on him dropping the case? That seems to be his biggest motivation, is keeping his job. Just make it to where if he defies you, then you fire him. Because at that point, it sounds like he would do just whatever you said. It already seems like it's a pretty corrupt world to begin with. I mean, when he shows up to take away or to investigate the murder initially of the Soylent director, I mean, he literally takes more shit from his apartment than the would-be robber guy that killed him did. You know, it was supposed to be looking like a robbery, but he didn't steal half the shit that Charlton Heston did. It's a great scene. I mean, you know, he just grabs a pillowcase, of all things, you know, not even trying to find a real bag because he's in a rush or something, and just starts loading it up with all kinds of crazy shit. You know, he's taking soap, he's taking food, he's taking booze, he's bullying the bodyguard, he takes advantage of the woman, basically just does whatever the fuck he wants. So obviously he knows that there's some kind of corruption going on there. Oh, yeah, and also they sell off the guy's body. Like they knew that it was going to go to a waste reprocessing center and that they get money from this, and then he has a conversation with his lieutenant about divvying up the money from that, and the waste disposal guy that comes and picks it up from him. Were they supposed to conduct a proper autopsy or something? I don't know. Sure doesn't seem like anybody gives a shit. In fact, the only person who even questions this whole process is the woman in the furniture. So the iconic riot control trucks that you see on the cover here really goes into the world building. I really enjoy it. Like I said, this movie, half this movie, maybe more than half this movie, is just establishing this world and then kind of navigating and exploring it. I love how all the staircases are just covered in people. I love how that everyday normal objects from our objective reality are considered extremely special within the context of this universe. Enough so that it's driving the plot points, like the jar of strawberry jam, and of course the oceanography books. If you can impress a guy whose job description is book and who does nothing but go through books, and if you can bring him a book that impresses him, obviously there's something going on with that book. And it turns out there it was. So another plot hole, I suppose, I would say. How did they go from reading the oceanography books and discovering that the plankton is dying to then assuming or going on the path that Soylent Green was then only made of people? Because that's what's mentioned there. That's how this whole ball gets rolling. and it's kind of weak. I mean, suspension of disbelief and all that. But presumably, those oceanography books just talk about the unavailability of plankton, which is what they were telling everybody it was made of. But after Soul brings the books to the exchange, they all look at the book, and then that's the first thing that they all think. Oh, it's Soylent Green's made out of people. And now we gotta tell the detective, and he's gonna go investigate it and make sure and find proof for them. But then we get on to the other stage of it, that he doesn't find any proof. He doesn't have any physical proof. All he can do is basically prove it to himself. I mean, it would be his word versus anybody else's. Obviously, detectives don't carry very much weight in this society. It's not Judge Dredd. And if he tells his lieutenant, why would his lieutenant care? Is it one of those things that's just so awful that it would just be shut down? The more people that knew about it, there would be riots and everything. It seems like there's already riots, and it seems like the police have got them pretty well under control. So maybe it would reach some critical point that it would be too many and it would overwhelm them. That would have been a nice little piece of dialogue, nice little extra scene, is to throw something like that in there. Otherwise, it's just kind of implied and we have to kind of imagine it. And then what would the people do? I mean, obviously, there's a huge food shortage going on here. I don't know. It gets back to that whole thing. Would you rather starve to death, or would you rather eat human meat and be a cannibal? That trope's played out in dozens of sci-fi films already or since. So one way that this world gets rid of excess people is that they offer this really super pleasant euthanasia experience. Again, you can tell it's part of the whole process along with everything else that actually works within this society and is actually nice. You can tell that this euthanasia center is very well designed, very well staffed. They've got everything that they need in order to make all this happen. The lines are very short, there's no people laying around everywhere like there is in the rest of the city, and seemingly everyone knows where this place is, so maybe there's just this one big building. So it's a little line, and it's maybe a handful of lines that are there when they're trying to figure out, when Soul's trying to figure out with the rest of the exchange books, what to do about this situation. How do we combat this massive corporation that's in cahoots with the governor and the police and everybody else to make sure that this stays a secret? And they decide that maybe only God can help them out. So that's what he decides to do. Decides to tell God, which is sweet and all, but I mean, hasn't there already been another dozen or so people that have been killed with this knowledge? Couldn't they have also told God, like maybe the priest? But I get it. Soul is just, it's also, he's disgusted with this world and how things have completely degraded for him since he was a child and yada yada yada. So I suppose it's a bit of a friendly dystopia. The government won't just outright kill people, which they could in a variety of ways, including letting nasty diseases run through the population, outright starving population on purpose by stockpiling the food and not distributing it, causing an industrial accident that would prevent the food supply from even happening in the first place. No, they don't do any of that. They just make everything completely suck and give you a really easy way out. And the euthanasia scene is really wonderful. It comes really late in the movie, and it's a really sharp contrast to the rest of the visuals of the movie. And it's a big jump out to the audience. Hey, this is the way that it is currently for you, obviously, because they have, video of it. And if you don't want your world to look like this world, then you need to do something about this ecological disaster that we're all experiencing at this moment.
Message!
And even though Charlton Heston's character, for example, grew up in this dystopia, it still has a tremendous impact on him emotionally, watching all of these scenes during the euthanasia scene. So the movie ends with Detective Thorne maybe dying, possibly dying, unclear. Again, he's telling his lieutenant to go tell the exchange that Soylent Green is people, and I guess that they're both forgetting that there's a gigantic room full of people that they just told that Soylent Green is people. I mean, if those people won't believe these two guys, why would they believe the exchange? They don't really seem to be treating books any better than they treat detectives in this future. But maybe they hold some kind of sway. It would have been nice to have another scene demonstrating that, for example. So that's it. That's the end of the movie. I can see why the movie was so popular at the time, because it's got that nice wrap-up short sentence that you can say to somebody to kind of make fun of it and, give a little wink and a smile. But it's also one of those movies that it's very difficult to describe to somebody. Because like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, you can't give away the ending to describe what's actually happening. Like The Sixth Sense. Like if you're trying to give a synopsis of The Sixth Sense to somebody without revealing what happens in the movie, what exactly do you tell them? Same thing in this regard. So to describe this movie to somebody, Soylent Green, what am I supposed to say to someone who's never seen it? Am I supposed to say that it's a detective movie? That it's a good sci-fi movie? Should I just throw in there, oh, there's a really big twist near the end? No, you really can't. No one really cares, so you have to kind of do that really big implying thing. It's, oh yeah, it's really good, and you have to watch it to find out why it's really good, because I can't tell you because it'll spoil it for you. And then they say, oh, well, what is it about? And, I can't tell you that either, because then that'll ruin it. Because if I tell you anything about the movie without including the ending, then it's going to sound really lame. Because who the hell wants to watch a detective movie from 1973? At the same time, no one's really terribly impressed with an ecological disaster movie from 1973, a sci-fi movie from 1973, because there's not really that many sci-fi elements. It doesn't take place in space. There's no advanced technology. Everything is gritty and sucks, and actually the movie is terribly depressing, to be completely honest. It's about the futility of trying to stop this huge juggernaut of things that are conspiring against the common man, that there's really nothing left to do except to tell everybody about this monstrosity that they've come to, that they've eventually boiled down to, in the hopes of overthrowing this horrible system. But then at the same time, it's like, well, what are you going to replace that system with? There's no other obvious things that are going on that they're enforcing. And referencing before too, I mean, what are they going to restore women's rights? Didn't seem like anyone was concerned about that during the movie. Is there all of a sudden going to be more employment because you overthrew the Soylent Corporation and Santini? Doesn't look like it. The greenhouse effect in itself is supposed to be some kind of self-perpetuating thing once it gets to a certain point, so that it's not that whatever they're doing that they can stop. It already looks like industrialization's already at a standstill anyway. They don't even seem to have power plants or any other resources to exploit, so yeah, it's a pretty depressing movie. But would I recommend it? Yeah, absolutely. If at the very least you can look back on it and say, hey, at least this didn't happen. Yet.